Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
At the global level, environment and social governance is becoming increasingly important as an essential component of corporate governance, sustainable development, and corporate responsibility. We would carry the discussion forward with a new set of corporate leaders. We have with us Rahul Singh, Assistant Director, NTU Singapore; Neil Parekh, Chairman, the Singapore Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry; Amita Chaudhary, Group Head of Sustainability, AIA; Professor Tim White, President's Chair in Material Science and Engineering, NTU Singapore; Gautam Bhardwaj, Co-founder and Director, Pinbox Solutions and Ashoka Fellow.
We only have one planet. We don't have another planet to go to. And this is the only place. We have this rock that revolves around sun. That's our home. And we need to make sure that this home is there for a longer time to come, because we don't actually inherit the planet from our forefathers, but we need to preserve it for our future generations. So about 5 years back, I was sitting in a big investment bank, and I tried to do something called Lunch and Learn. And the topic was ESG. A grand total of 5 people showed up, and largely for lunch, I would imagine. But today, when we talk about these 3 letters, ESG, I would say that there is not a single industry that is not impacted by these words. And I think in the history or the journey of ESG, in some sense, is the journey of mankind itself, or journey of money. So when we talk about money, we know that it fundamentally serves the 3 purposes: store of value, unit of accounting, medium of exchange. But somewhere on the way, we came to a conclusion that hoarding money itself is good, right? It no longer serves those 3 purposes. I think now we are at a cusp of society where we are actually thinking how we can use this money for the betterment of society, not just holding it, but using it for the betterment of society. And technology very much plays a part of that. Now, I think now technology is mature enough where you can actually put money in a way that it's equitable. So capitalism is the best way to generate wealth, but not necessarily to distribute wealth. So how do you put consciousness back into capitalism? How do you put purpose back into finance? I have Neil with me here. He is the chairman of Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce. Then I have Gautam here, who is the CEO and founder of Pinbox. Amita, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer, and finally Prof. Tim White, who is the Vice President of NTU. So Neil, the first question to you. So you are the President of Singapore Indian Chamber of Commerce. Where do you see these 2 countries collaborating as far as ESG is concerned?
I think Singapore and India have a lot to work in common. First and foremost, if you look at just disclosure. So as you may know, many exchanges, including the SGX, is going to come up with mandatory rules for disclosure on climate. And I think that has led to a mini industry of fintech and data providers who are scrambling to put the right system together. And SGX is not the only exchange. There are numerous other exchanges. I think with the expertise that we have in India, combined with a growing need, I think there's clearly work to be done between Singapore and India in that sphere in terms of just developing the disclosure infrastructure. The second one, in my view, is in the world of carbon taxes. Now, Singapore has a carbon tax, so do many other countries, so do many blocs like the EU. Now, the idea behind carbon tax is to create the right incentives to have clean energy and, in a way, disincentives for products and services that do not meet those standards. India does not have a carbon tax. Many other countries in Asia don't have a carbon tax. But there are blocs like the EU that are effective later this year, 1st October. If you want to sell into the EU, you need to either have a carbon tax regime yourself or need to improvise or find a way to make sure that there is some kind of penalty that is paid to sell into the EU. As of today, it feels that they intend to stick to the 1st October date. So I think Singapore certainly has the intellectual property or a thought process that would be useful for countries, other countries in Asia, but specifically India, in developing a framework that can meet the EU requirements as well as other blocs. And last but not the least, President Biden, in his US Inflation Reduction Act, has given significant incentives, market-based incentives to create new products, new services to enhance the ESG framework. Now that is very US-centric and is more to bring business into the US, but from an India and a Singapore standpoint, it's important to work together to move forward and see how we can compete in that area as a team rather than in a dysfunctional each country for itself way.
Yeah. So thank you for that, and I'll come back to the carbon tax. It's one of my favorite questions. I'll come back to you on that. But moving on to you, Gautam, and you told me not to mention this, but nonetheless, I will take the liberty now that I'm in the driver's seat to mention this. Gautam started his career as an actor. He acted in a very famous series called Fauji alongside Shah Rukh Khan. So, and then from his real life, he became a real Fauji, where he was actually fighting inequality, fighting a debt trap through innovation in pension. So 50 years back, Muhammad Yunus of the Grameen Bank, he basically came up with this concept of Grameen Bank, where microfinance, lending it to the poorest of the poor, and seeing if that works. And that proof of concept really took off. He got the Nobel Prize for that. So as far as credit is concerned, we have made some progress. Banking, we have made some progress. But when it comes to insurance, why is there no insurance? Why is there no pension for everybody? In fact, in this country, if you see, in the last 5 years, massive progress has been made. And today, 80% of the people are banked. Yet when you talk about insurance, only 3% of people have any kind of insurance or life insurance, and less than 1% have insurance beyond life. And same with pension. I think there is a lot to be done in terms of providing pension to the bottom of the pyramid. So you have done great work in that field. And financial inclusion, ESG, is very much about empowering people at the bottom of the pyramid. So your thoughts on that?
Thanks. And well, I've been actually scratching my head in terms of trying to connect the dots between ESG and pensions. So I think pension inclusion or micro pensions, which is what we do, is, I think we are where Professor Yunus was 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, it seemed to be a mad idea. You know, I mean, how do we give out small loans to people and how do we collect payments back? Today, I think the situation, we are much luckier. So mad ideas even have a better chance of succeeding purely because of, let's say, the DFS or the digital ecosystem and infrastructure that has been built. If you look at India, for instance, and to your question as to why do we have such a large pension coverage gap, the answer is actually very simple. Pensions traditionally is a benefit that accrues as a result of an employment contract, right? So if I'm a civil servant or I'm working with the Tatas, I have a contract with an employer, and when I retire, I get a pension. Now, unfortunately, 90% of India does not have an employer. You know, the farmers and street vendors and Uber drivers and others, they don't have an employer, therefore they don't have an employment contract, and therefore they will not get a pension benefit for 20, 25, 30 years of their lives when they're old. Now, in terms of scale, I mean, out of, say, 500 million people in the workforce in India, more than 400 million people are now marching towards old age with nearly zero savings in their pockets. And somehow it doesn't occur to everyday people because they're battling so many current issues that we should save for old age. So you're saving for children, you're saving for very other things. But today we find that children are really emerging as a really suboptimal portfolio for a 30-year retirement. I mean, you know, they're just not going to be around. So what we do is, what we look at is how can we leverage the DFS ecosystem that has been created with, you know, through a PPP between the Government of India, regulators like RBI and private institutions to create, let's say, Aadhaar for eKYC or use UPI for making it easy and simple for somebody in a village to start saving for old age. Now, if we can do this at scale in a country like India, I mean, currently we have two options. One is we wait for 2050, and by the way, this problem is as big and as grim as climate change, because 30 years later, you'll end up with 1.7 billion people just between Asia, Africa, and Latin America who will be old and will not be getting a pension. At that time, the old age poverty crisis will probably be the primary reason for a jump in poverty levels worldwide.
Sure.
But if you flip this around and say, okay, it's going to cost us $50 trillion to pay a tax-funded pension, which we can't afford. So what if we were to motivate, let's say, Parvati Ben sitting in a village in Orissa or in Gujarat? Can we create a mechanism by which she can start saving small amounts for her retirement while she's still young? And the good thing is that we are talking about a young population. So if we can do this, three things happen. One, Parvati Ben's chances of being non-poor diminish because her savings could then be managed by an ICICI or an SBI or somebody securely. They can be managed, they can grow over a period of time. She could be non-poor when she's old. The second is, if we can get even a quarter of the people, to do this at scale, you could, at a global level, you could end up with $15-20 trillion of new long-term savings that could suddenly occur. And this could improve economic development, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So it could improve Parvati Ben's life in other ways as well, if she, and if this money with better governance was invested in ESG compliant, investments, then it has a triple impact where the fact that Parvati Ben is probably from a farm background faces a disproportionately higher risk of the adverse impact of climate change. If this can be done, then it can improve her ability to not fall prey to the ill effects of climate change. So I think pensions clearly is a very big issue. It needs to be solved for today. And good thing is that countries like India are already doing this. We're working now in 6 countries between Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And we're seeing this succeeding. We're seeing this succeeding in Rwanda, India, and many other countries.
Yeah. I think you raised an important point about multiplier effect. So we talk about multiplier effect in banking, but you talked about the multiplier effect from pension funds itself. There is a multiplier effect that probably gets understated. And Amita, moving on to you. So similar to his question that I asked him about financial inclusion, I was having this discussion with Piyush Gupta of DBS Bank, and he mentioned something which struck me, that typically you retire at the age of 60. And for my generation, I live in Singapore, the life expectancy for male is about 95. So I will live until 95. That means I'm going to live 35 years beyond my retirement. And assuming that I started my career at 25, so I have 35 years to work, and I better have saved enough in those 35 years to make sure that I can live comfortably in the next 35 years. So that involves pension, that involves insurance. So again, the same question to you, that why have we not able to penetrate insurance in the way we should? Because all your saving, all your banking will crumple if one of the two happens. If you have a life condition which requires medical attention, or if there is a condition where suddenly the breadwinner is no more. Yeah. So your thoughts on that?
Just before I answer your question, the point that you made around how is pension inclusion related to ESG, and ESG is environmental social governance, right? So social does factor in ensuring that we leave no one behind. We create an inclusive, prosperous society that's environmentally responsible, your no poverty, SDG 1, your 10 reduced inequalities, and so on. So it's absolutely critical to make a wider impact on the society. Now, to your question around life and health insurance, and you've already quoted the figures, right? You have banking penetration of 75%, but you have life insurance penetration of 3.2, and then health is much lower. And that's not all. There is a double whammy. You have a 91% protection gap, which means that not only, even those people who have protection, they don't have adequate protection. The protection gap is the difference between the resources that a family will need, say, for instance, mortgage or children's education, versus what they will have in case of an unfortunate event to maintain the same level of standard of living. So you have protection gap. And the third whammy is that, especially in India, the insurance is clustered around the middle class, and it's available to the more affluent. So the low income and the more marginalized, are underinsured and underserved. And that is debilitating for a society and a nation, right? I mean, you talk about banking. Banking is important for the economic development of a country. Without health and life insurance, that can create financial instability. It can actually impact social safety nets. It can increase the healthcare cost burden for a society, and it can result in instability from an economic perspective. So it's critical to address the protection gap. I work for AIA. AIA is the largest pan-Asian life and health insurer with presence in 18 markets. We declared a goal in 2021 of helping 1 billion people by 2030 to help them live healthier, longer, better lives in line with our purpose. That's about improving their physical health, mental health, environmental health while championing financial inclusion. And to just give you a specific example, I mean, I can keep talking about it, but just to give you a specific example from Tata AIA, what does that mean from a product perspective? Why are we not penetrated enough? We've got to have the right kind of products, Rahul, the simple products. It's a marketing 101, right? You have to have distribution, so we are partnering with the government for post offices and community service centers and reaching 450,000 and 150,000 respectively, the rural households through the simple products. You need to make sure that the communication is in vernacular language, that you are able to build a certain trust level, which you would know very well because you are actually in the weeds of how you do the pension inclusion. And also from an insurance perspective, we have to provide investment-linked products because that's what people are wanting as well.
Moving on to you, Prof. Tim. I think what enables bankers, insurance guys, and industry to innovate some of these things is technology. I think technology is the pillar over which all these can be built. So you are an eminent scientist. You have spent your career as a material scientist. And today we look at the challenges that we have, right from carbon neutrality to efficient energy system or biodegradable plastic. These are all, in some sense, innovations which bank upon material science innovation. So could you throw some light on what are the things that we can expect in the near future? So where do you see technology going forward as far as ESG is concerned?
Thank you, Rahul. And I'm sort of the outlier amongst my colleagues on the panel today, but I think we can tie things together quite nicely. I think it's always important to start from the basics. So what does a university do? A university is there to be a cauldron of ideas. It is there to allow debate. It's a place where you can generate new ideas and solutions. So we must always bear that in mind, and underpinning that are the young people in the university. So this has to be the driver for everything that we're doing when it comes to developing new materials and applying them to ESG. The other thing that needs to be said is that every university, every city, every country has a unique set of problems, but also a unique use of levers to find solutions to those. So if we think about NTU, of course the primary goal of any university is to educate, but it has to do two other things as well. It has to innovate and it has to elevate. The innovation has to be in the real world. We partner extensively with companies, and these companies can be anything from multinationals through to SMEs through to startups, but we partner with companies, and this is very important because it means that our students can see the real world applications of what they do. So we have something like 250 companies working on our campus, not beside our campus, on our campus. So why does that work so well? It works so well because, number one, it lets the companies look into the university to see the technologies that are coming out. It allows our professors to look into the companies to see what their needs are. And it allows our students to be interns in those companies so they generate a pathway to employment. I would love to see more and more efforts between Singapore, Africa, rest of Asia, Latin America, because we need solutions which are not the same solutions as in the global north. So this is very exciting for our students, and this means that we can come up with new and novel solutions which can then be exported outside of Singapore and around the world, and of course partnerships with India would be a very important part of that. So coming now to the specifics of material science, Again, a historical perspective is useful here. Originally, materials were linear. You used to dig something out of the ground, you'd process it, you create a product, you throw it away. Completely linear process, and obviously that's not sustainable. So now we talk about circular economy. So we want to take the material, we want to use it, we want to extract some value, then we want to put that value back in. I think we have to ask a hard question. How successful has this been? And you're free to disagree with me, but I think the success to date has been limited. What proportion of plastics are actually getting recycled?
Yep.
And when they do get recycled, is it economically driven or is it subsidised? There's a lot more that has to be done. So what? We started with linear, we have circular economy. What is the next level beyond that? It's basically three-dimensional material processing, where you not only take into account the materials, but also the energy sums, the economic sums, the social impact sums. All of that has to come together, and that is not easy to do. But unless we start to think about the problem more holistically than we have been to date, then I think we're going to be stuck, that the economic drivers to allow us to do this will not be there. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but it does mean that in the students at NTU and throughout universities, they have to be well aware of the difficulty of these problems. And I think that, you know, there is a little bit of a feeling that deep tech takes too long. You know, if you're developing a new material, you don't do it in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Look at carbon nanotubes. Look at buckyballs. Do they have any real commercial outcomes yet? They have some, they're coming, but this is 20 years later. So it's not going to happen quickly. So you have to have this very broad appreciation of what it takes to make the impacts. So then coming back to some of the other comments here, if we think about NTU and what its focus are, it's really the grand challenges. So obviously environment and sustainability are there, but that's intimately entwined with health. So, you know, if people can live longer, be productive longer, then that impacts insurance, pensions and so forth. It impacts clearly on, you know, what will industry look like in the future, Industry 4.0. How do you manage a factory where employees are scared they're going to lose their job to a robot? And of course, if they lose their job to a robot, then their pensions are at risk again. And then finally, of course, you've got the digital economy. And that is really the platform upon which everything has to be developed. So I think the short answer to your question is that we have to look at materials much more holistically. Mm-hmm. It's of course not linear, we understand this. I would argue that circular does not add up all the sums properly. Right. So we have to have this three-dimensional approach which involves all the components of transforming materials and getting them back into the economy. Thank you.
Sure. I love your definition, the way you said it was linear. We are digging out something, and I argue that if you look at GDP is nothing but how soon you can unearth the earth and bring it onto the surface. You put something in the soil, plant grows, that goes in your agriculture produce. You're mining the earth, some metals are coming out, building some fancy cars out of it, that goes into your GDP. You take some earth out, build some bricks, then you are stacking it up, buildings are built, that goes into your GDP. So there is something fundamentally wrong with the way we define development, which is how soon you can unearth the earth. So I very much like your idea, can we put the earth back into the earth? So I very much like that idea, and I think one person who is doing that extremely well is Neil here, because Neil, you are also the partner and head of Asia, Australia and New Zealand for Tikehu Capital, which has been awarded the 2023 top-rated ESG performer by Sustainalytics. So clearly you're doing something right there. So what is it that you're doing that we need to learn from you?
So from a private equity investment standpoint, it's very important to invest with people who have the right values. I think that's paramount. Back in 2015, before it became fashionable to be investing in ESG compliant companies and products and various things, we, the partners of the firm, decided that it was an important priority for us. I think all of us saw what happened at COP27 recently with you know, some very drastic examples being shown that if we don't bring the temperature down significantly, then a few countries will not exist in the next few years. So back in 2015, we started on this journey before, I guess, a few years before others did, simply because there was a passion to do the right thing and to invest in the right companies. Now, what have we done right? I think there are a lot of things we've done right, and we've done a lot of things wrong too. So let's start and focus on what we've done right. I think it's important to be consistent. Very simple. The temptation to veer away from the focus is very high, because often there is a difference in returns, especially earlier, between ESG compliant investments and non-ESG compliant investments in the same area. So if you're an investor and you're trying to maximize returns, there is obviously a temptation to go for the highest returning asset. Now, I think it's important to be disciplined about it, and the reason I say that is every day there is something that is veering from what you decided at the beginning of the year should be the focus for the rest of the year. Number two is find like-minded people on the company side. So we invest into companies across the globe. In Asia, we have found that most people are very consistent with the objectives, and it's worked very well for us in Asia and in Australia. But if you don't have the right passion on the other side, then the execution of your strategy gets distorted, because as an investor, you can't be micromanaging every investment you make. You know, you got over 60 investments in Asia, you can't be managing all of them yourself, obviously. So there are a few disciplines that need to be kept in mind. But the overall arching comment that I would make is make sure you're clear of what the goals are, and then be consistent over time. And often it's easier said than done, especially when you're in the business of maximizing investment returns and IRR.
Yeah, I think you raised a very important point, and I think there is a bit of a myopic view that has prevailed from Q1 to Q2. I like to call it Qayamat se Qayamat tak. So that's the view that has been driving most of the thought, because managers are incentivized quarterly, right? So definitely that's one aspect that needs to be looked into. The other aspect you hinted at is compliance aspect, and Amita, my question is to you, because I was having this discussion with you, or you brought up this yesterday, that when there is an opportunity and there is a lack of guardianship, crime always happens. So regulators are actually trying to be that guardian, but because they are trying to be that guardian and trying to close in that gap of opportunity where you could be greenwashing and you could be doing the wrong things. So are we now going into a place where we are tick boxing? We are doing what I would say the right thing for the wrong reasons. And the example that I like to quote is, why do you wear a helmet? Do you wear it because you think it's for your safety, or do you wear it because you're afraid of the ticket? So by central banks and by regulators bringing in a lot of regulations which are forcing financial institutions and industries to be ESG compliant, are they doing it because they believe in it, or are they just doing it because they're forced to do it?
If we talk about AI, as I said, AI has the purpose of helping people live healthier, longer, better lives. And it's been it has a legacy of trust of 100 years with the policyholders, and a founding philosophy of doing the right thing in the right way with the right people, and the right results will come. So are we doing ESG because of regulation? No, we're doing ESG because of, one, it's aligned to our philosophy, because we want to endure for the next 100 years. And secondly, because ESG is integral for us to future-proof our business, to deliver on our purpose, and to create long-term value for our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are our customers, our employees, our suppliers, our partners. And increasingly, they expect that a company is making profit for their shareholders, but also contributing to positive impact for the planet and for the society. In the long term, if we want to be successful, if a business wants to be successful, we've got to be able to attract and retain the best talent. You've got to have investors wanting to invest with you, employees who want to work for you. You need to have trusted relationship with your communities. And you need to have social license to operate. You need to build brand equity with your customers, and all of your stakeholders expect that you're going to take action on your most significant environmental, social governance impacts. So it's critical for us, and it's critical for businesses to endure that they take action on ESG. But regulation is very important. complex environmental and social challenges require that everyone plays a part. You have communities, you have your civil society, you have governments, you have public sector, you've got private sector, you have multilateral entities. Everyone needs to play their part, and regulation is critically important. Let's take the example of the defining issue of our time, climate change. So climate change is the biggest risk to global economy, to human health. It's going to endanger lives. It's going to impact food security. It's going to impact water shortage, create biodiversity loss. We're talking about Asia. Asia is at the front line of climate crisis. It is most vulnerable region to climate crisis. 40% of the disasters last year were from Asia, lethal heat waves, flooding, drought, and most of them in Southeast Asia and in South Asia, where climate change is expected to impact 18% of GDP of Asia and 35% in India if no action is taken. So it's susceptible to climate catastrophe. But it is also a big contributor now. So more than half of greenhouse gas emissions are from Asia. Asia is poised for growth. 40% is expected to be 50% of GDP by 2040, which means that as Asia grows and population grows, there will be more energy consumption. And if we don't do anything about it, again, we are facing a massive climate crisis. So regulators have to step in and create certain types of regulation, and we see that that's happening. SOPS was here, and we've got central bank regulator of Mr. Ravi Menon in Singapore doing big work in the area of climate. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that countries and regulators are driving regulation for the purposes of understanding of climate risk assessment by companies across the board. So we see task force on climate-related financial disclosures mandate across multiple jurisdictions in Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and even India, where they are asking, not yet regulated, but they are asking insurers whether they are prepared for climate. We need to have capital that goes into renewable energy, into EV charging stations, into batteries. 90% of the world's GDP has made net zero commitments. Countries have made net zero commitments. 2017 India, Singapore 2050. In order to achieve those commitments, we need the capital inflows into clean energy solutions. We need to foster innovative capital mechanisms to crowd in private sector capital. As an insurer, my first duty is to my policyholders to make sure that I'm providing them with sustainable risk-adjusted returns. And so we need concessional capital. We need blended capital mechanisms in order to be able to de-risk the capital allocation to a low-carbon economy future. And then I think, Neil, you made the point, right? We need to build knowledge and capacity of the companies in order to take action, but also standardize disclosures. Because there is completely aggregate confusion as far as ESG ratings is concerned, measurement is concerned, and we need to be able to regulate this, harmonize the disclosures. And so therefore, India's step of BRSR for 1,000 companies to provide standardized disclosures step in the right direction. So just in conclusion, I want to say, everyone has to play a part, as you know, for these challenges. And there's an old African proverb that says that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. But I think in the case of ESG and sustainability, if you want to go far and you want to go fast, you go together.
Yeah, so
Can I just add one point to this?
Sure.
So I think what is happening is globally, we're seeing pension funds are the largest reservoir of long-term savings, right? I mean, the largest pool of assets are sitting with pension funds. So I think pension funds can play an extremely important role with better investment governance in forcing even investee companies to become more ESG compliant.
Totally. I think the whole ESG revolution started with the particularly the Norges and the Scandinavian.
And now what we're seeing is that institutions like the OECD, for instance, are playing an important role, to your point, in creating benchmarks, which regulators now are sort of imbibing and saying, okay, if you're a pension fund in Kenya or in Chile or wherever, we expect your investment regulations or investment guidelines to reflect this reality of ESG compliance. And I think that's a big change. And as pension inclusion increases, as more and more people start saving for old age, you could end up with another $30–40 trillion of new savings in the next couple of decades, which again can flow towards, strengthening ESG compliance and better governance.
Absolutely, but I will also, Amita mentioned about the African proverb, and there is this thing, it said that when India innovates, it innovates for the world, because we have a population base of 1.4 billion, which is almost the same population, slightly higher than the population of Africa. And you have done some great work in Africa, in Rwanda in particular, with which NTU also, Prof. Team, I understand, does great work. So could you just explain what is some of the learnings that you took from India to Rwanda to another continent, and how successful was that?
Thanks. So what we find is that, like India, a lot of other countries have started emulating looking at the India example on India Stack and building the DFS ecosystem, digital ecosystem with digital IDs, digital payments, and so on and so forth. So what we are doing is we've created, and we are coincidentally India and Singapore based. So what we've created is a globally replicable pension tech platform. So we are the only social pension tech worldwide, which provides technology and technical assistance to governments to launch national pension system kind of programs. So NPS in India was, our team worked with the Ministry of Finance in designing this program, which today has 40 million subscribers. We are still scratching the surface. I mean, we have a long way to go, but we already have 40 million subscribers and about $120 billion of new assets. We worked with the Rwandan government to launch a similar program based on, the India model, which today about 50% of Rwandan citizens are already saving voluntarily for old age and have generated about 55-60 billion francs of new savings. We're doing the same thing in Bangladesh, replicating the same model in Kenya. So I think to a certain extent, I find that there is a possibility of templatizing some of these solutions and being able to replicate them in developing countries, where both the supply side strengths exist and the demand side needs and challenges are also fairly similar.
Yeah, so if you ever want an academic institution to write a case study on this, you know who to contact.
No, in fact, we would love to talk to you, sir, about setting up, we're thinking of setting up an innovation hub or a lab where, exactly to your point, I think there can be so much more that can be done, which can be developed in countries like India and Singapore and then replicated in other jurisdictions.
Prof. Tim, you would make a short comment to that?
A short comment and also just an observation, maybe a slightly provocative observation as well. The first thing I'd like to say is that underpinning what NTU is doing in the ESG space is a $1 billion sustainability bond, which will mature in about 2035 if we meet certain targets. And this is where my provocative question to my colleagues comes. When I listen to the issues around ESG investing, ESG regulation and so forth, and then you commented, Rahul, the problem of greenwashing and so forth. I mean, is this essentially a problem of education and marketing that, try as you might, a significant portion of the population will not believe that this is, a good thing, that, what's driving what? Are the companies actually wanting to go out there and make the world a better place, or the companies dressing themselves up so that it looks like they want to make the world a better place? And that's a very crude way of putting it, and I accept that. But this is something I struggle with, and I don't know whether my colleagues have some comment to that. Is it a marketing problem and an issue of trying to convince people that this is the right way to do things, and more to the point, the only economically sustainable way to get change?
Yeah. So I'll take a stab. So I think, the point that I made earlier is that there is now an expectation from your stakeholders that for the long-term success of the company, you have to not only make profit for the shareholders, but you need to be able to contribute to planet and society, and there is pressure on companies to show that. There is regulation that requires disclosure for that increasingly, and so on. And so there are obviously a lot of companies in the world that are purpose-led, and they want to do the right thing, and they want to be able to contribute to addressing their most significant environmental, social governance impacts. And also, I'd like to say that and for those companies that take it that make ESG integral to their DNA, it becomes a competitive advantage over a period of time that they recognize. But because of this, it's just been the last 2 years that the sustainability landscape has become completely mainstream from nowhere. I mean, 3 years ago at the World Economic Forum, this wasn't even a topic or a side topic, but now it's become the mainstream topic. And so companies are trying to first demonstrate their credentials. There is a huge amount of reporting burden. There is a high level of regulation. And so they're scrambling perhaps to do the right thing, but also wanting to ensure that they don't get left behind or be perceived in the wrong way. And that's leading to greenwashing. So I think, as I said, it's going to be a combination of multiple parties working together, and regulation is extremely important. And that's why standardized disclosures become absolutely key to ensuring and integrating that into financial accounting, and ensuring that externalities are taken into account. And if that becomes the norm in a way that's standardized, then whether you're purpose-led or whether you're doing it because you want to show it, it's, you are going to be achieve your goals around sustainability. Thanks.
I think most companies now, certainly in the world today, in the last 2 years, as Amita mentioned, talk a very good game, meaning ESG is at the core, and they are passionate about ESG. You have consultants write everything for them. It's not what they say, it's what they do, which is super important. And running PE investments in the Asia Pacific region, for a fund, I have to tell you, every day you get told that they're very passionate and they're going to deliver, but a good percentage get tempted away. And that was my comment earlier, where on one side you're putting pressures to make sure you deliver on your financial goals, but also emphasize that you have numerous other stakeholders to cater to. For example, during COVID, most people's excuse for not looking at ESG was, well, I'm just trying to survive, so why should I even think about ESG right now? So I've had numerous conversations with portfolio companies in the last 6-9 months. Is COVID is over, I think you need to go back to your commitments that you made earlier. So, it goes back to regulation, but it also goes back a little more than regulation. I think there has to be an overall acceptance that financial goals are not the only goals to meet. The shareholders are not the only stakeholders to satisfy, but you have an obligation to society as a whole and different stakeholders. To be frank, not everyone genuinely buys into that as of now. And while there has been a lot of, the needle has certainly moved, as Amita said, in the last 2 years in terms of talk, I don't think the action has completely followed. So I think it's in the execution that we need to really focus on in the years to come.
So Neil, that's a brilliant point you're making, and so I write books as well on the sides when NTU allows me the time to do it. So in one of my books, it's titled An Atheist Gets the Gita. I talk about three karna shuddhi. Three karna is particle and shuddhi is cleanness. So it basically, there are three things. There is thought, there is words, and there is actions. So unless you have these three in sync and aligned, you're going nowhere. So where are we in the ESG revolution? I think there was a lot of thought leadership, as Amita was mentioning, in World Economic Forum and all. On the sidelines, they would talk about these things. Suddenly it has become mainstream, it has become fashionable, everybody talks about it, but I think action is yet to come.
So I think the main thing, if you're looking for a solution which is viable, you must understand the market well. You must take this very complete approach. This is what's important. So, this will be a very intensive competition. So what I think is, take advantage, the students in these groups, take advantage of the fact that you're coming from two perspectives, India and Singapore. This gives you some unique leverage, some unique understanding which other groups will not have. First of all, look what you're going to do, the problem you're going to solve, look at your perspective from each country, come up with a solution which will be across both of those. If you can integrate your thought in that way, then I think your chances of success are much, much higher.
Yeah, great point. So I agree with you. I think that In order to come up with a successful solution, customer centricity or the stakeholder centricity is going to be absolutely key. And there are companies like ours, and I'm sure there are others who are trying, all of us, collectively. There are many challenges to solve. Financial inclusion has been mentioned many, many times here. If you're able to ensure customer centricity and come up with a real world solution for a complex challenge such as financial inclusion, then the chances of success are high. Thank you.
I think I completely agree with you. And we've seen that happening in real life. So I think the good thing is that technology today can actually enable almost anything, right? I mean, I think the only thing that holds us back is really our imagination, and to your point, a clear understanding of the needs of the people for whom we are developing solutions. So if we can understand the needs and constraints better, and we can open up our imagination, then I think technology perhaps is going to be the easiest part of the solution. That's what I think.
Thank you. I agree with all what my panelists said. I'll just say one thing. Go big. The reason I'm saying is in the ESG space, it's relatively early days. And as you've seen in different sectors, if you go big early in a sector that has got a lot of bandwidth to go, then both economic and other success comes your way.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Prof. Tim, Amita, Gautam, and Neil for that excellent panel. This is Rahul Singh. I'm the Assistant Director at NTU, and it has been a wonderful to share a panel with you. I hope that students and startups who are listening, they take away something from the message that you gave. We here, collectively, we will ensure that we leave you a better future.